just a couple of seconds here as some people are kind of jumping in, and we'll get rolling. I appreciate everybody being here. All right, so thanks for joining us today for our first Fireside Chat and live Q&A session. Today we're going to be walking through what's generally a hot button topic in the Gulf South, but applies to really businesses across the country that are dealing with storm season. So I know you're thinking, hurricane season started in June, but if you're from Louisiana or the Gulf South, you kind of know it doesn't really start to ramp up until sometime September, sometimes October. So since we're always kind of refining our plans internally and preparing for what might come, it just made sense to kind of go live here, bring in some of the experts and answer some questions for it. So with me today are two of In-Telecom's very best. So first I'll introduce Lance Noel. He's our Director of MSP Operations. Lance, tell us a little about yourself.
Well, first of all, Taylor, thanks for having me on here. My name's Lance. I've worked in the MSP industry for over 25 years within IT, working just for MSPs and all along the Gulf South. So being part of the storm problem and having to build plans around that has been part of what I've had to deal with my entire career. Spent all my career in MSPs or some type of managed services type of environment, working with companies on different aspects, from contingency planning to just overall IT structure, infrastructure, and processes that they're going to use to help keep their businesses going and utilize the technology that's available too.
Awesome, man. Yeah, glad to have you here. Certainly more of an expert than I am. Second, but certainly not last, my personal office hero. He's champion of making things make sense for me. We've got Trace Hester. He's our Director of Business Development. Trace, tell us a bit about yourself. How'd you end up here?
Yeah. Again, thanks for having us. It's always cool to get to talk shop and get opinions and feedback. So I am new to In-Telecom, new to MSP, really. It's been about 9 months or so. My experience is really in cybersecurity, cloud architecture, and the healthcare industry. So spent a lot of time as the HIPAA compliance and security officer for healthcare organizations. So very well versed in the documentation that you need for these kinds of situations, the planning that goes into them, not just the IT side, but as well as the legal side, the people side, the process side, and sort of everything that goes with it. So we've seen it all from a growing company. I'm like Lance. I've spent most of my career here in Louisiana. So we've experienced a lot of different disasters, a lot of hurricanes, a lot of flooding, small and large. So we've been through it before, and I'm excited for the challenge of putting that here in the MSP space and serving our clients, that way. What do we do prepare, and how do we help them prepare? So it's an interesting conversation.
Yeah. Certainly got your work cut out for you. That's a lot of process that go in there. All right, well, guys, I'm glad to have you with me. So let's go on and jump right on into it. We're talking hurricane season. Anybody that's in here watching, so just to kind of give you an idea of how this is working, Q&A mode is enabled. Feel free to ask questions as we're going through things. If any of the topics these guys are hitting on strikes a chord with you, you have something you want to ask or wanted some more clarification, feel free to ask, and we'll address it right then and there. We'll do a dedicated Q&A section here towards the end. But otherwise, I'm going to turn it over to these guys and let them go. So guys, let's talk hurricane season.
Yeah, I think here, specifically here in the Gulf South, hurricane season is a part of life. A lot of people think of hurricane season as being that summer activity. That's something we have to deal with during the summer. And a lot of people don't realize that hurricane season here in the Gulf South actually lasts from the 1st of June to the end of November. So when people are thinking of just a summer activity they have to deal with, half of your year is hurricane season. So in dealing with that, there's got to be a lot of plans in place that we have to get implemented for us as families, as communities, and as businesses. To think about it, just about 30 years ago, the furthest meteorology would plan hurricanes out was 72 hours. That's the furthest out that they would successfully, I say successfully, but even attempt to plan out a hurricane's path. You'd know that a hurricane was out there, but you have 3 days to react on, okay, that hurricane's coming to you. You got 3 days to do something about it. Over the last 12 years, that's really kind of improved some to where they'll start forecasting 96 hours out. And that's where you get kind of some of the most accuracy that comes with it. So, for example, 96 hours out, you've got probably a sway of about 150 nautical miles. And as the storm gets closer, then the cone of uncertainty kind of shrinks, gives you a better idea whether you're really in the eye of the storm or in the war zone of the storm per se. Really depends on how close that storm gets to you. It gets a little bit easier to predict. So us as businesses, we've got a plan for that. But if you wait and you plan for that when it gets closer to hurricane season, you got 96 hours to plan. So it goes back to the old adage of, if you fail to plan, then you plan to fail. And there's so much involved in this, and I think we'll talk a little bit about this. There's so much involved in these plans that you can't throw together in a few days and expect it to successfully be fulfilled. So as these storms start approaching, making a plan 96 hours out is too late. These are things that need to be starting to put into place earlier, that kind of get your business set up for these uncertainties. And I know here, as recently, Trace and I have worked on upgrading our hurricane plan. We've had a hurricane plan here at In-Telecom for years, but it's something that we have to revisit. And I think Trace can kind of help me here real quick on, what goes into this business continuity plan. Because when we're talking about continuity, we're talking about how does the business stay running in the event of one of these emergencies. So can you help me with this a little bit, Trace, about how that plan goes into place?
Yeah. So it's actually great insight, right? I mean, the information we have available to us now is much better and much more accurate than it was, 20 years or so ago. So really, that 96 hours that Lance is talking about, that's your go time. You're not planning 96 hours out. You should be implementing whatever your plan is 96 hours out. And storms are storms. I consider hurricane season year round. We've had ice storms here. Same response plan, right? So a business continuity plan is essentially how do you continue running? If you're like us, you have clients who might not be affected, and they still need to operate, which means you still need to operate. So the idea now is not so much disaster recovery, where you're picking up the pieces, but if you plan well and you document, which is what we're going to talk about, then it's business continuity. It's how do you respond and operate during the disaster, not how do we pick up the pieces after the disaster, because you shouldn't have to. And it can be as small as a 2-page document if you're a smaller organization. And I've seen very thorough business continuity plans, about 20, 25 pages long, depending on your compliance frameworks and all the needs that you have as an organization. So the core of a business continuity plan, though, should be that everyone in the organization has some understanding of what their role is during one of these situations, specifically a hurricane in this instance. Who's responsible for what? Accountability is a big part of your business continuity plan. The last thing you want to do is be calling around the org trying to figure out who's doing what, who's forwarding the mail, who's making sure this is done. So a business continuity plan, you can just start with, I got 2 pages and here are my critical vendors and their contact lists. Very simple, right? And it's something that any employee, any staff member can look at and go, oh, you know what? The power is out. I know who to call. Sounds simple, but having that there and who's responsible, who do we call internally when we go into plan mode? Our BC plan has our call tree. I'm responsible for notifying a few people. Lance is responsible for notifying and mobilizing a few more people, and so on and so forth. So you're really making sure that your organization is accountable to whatever your operational needs are during a hurricane. And you can start there. 2 pages is plenty. It doesn't have to be overwhelming. If you're in an industry where you have shipping, receiving, warehouse, where folks aren't necessarily on a computer all the time, laminate the important part, slap it on the wall. We've supported pharmacies in the past, and that's exactly what they do. Pharmacists, there's a lot of regulations around how they do things. They're not really on their computers the same way we're on our computers, but in the case of an emergency or in case of a disaster response, the relevant sections of their BC plan is posted on the wall. So I think that's a good place to start, is gathering your vendors, gathering your core people. And we'll get into that later about how to prepare your people. Lance is going to have a much deeper knowledge on the technical side, right? I'm going to let him speak to those types of preparations, but you have to look at documentation as preparation. People panic. And it doesn't matter how far out you notify them, right? If it's a hurricane's coming a week, their number one focus is not business. It's just not. And that's something we have to realize as sort of concept owners for these business continuity situations, that my coworkers are focused on their families. They're focused on what do they do to get ready for this hurricane? What do they need personally? So your business continuity needs to be very simple, very accessible, and very clear with what you need and how you need to do it. So I would encourage everyone to sit down, gather those core ingredients, my vendors, my contact list, my internal people that need to be called and notified, and then go from there. I don't think you can do too little here. I think anything is better than nothing when it comes to a business continuity plan. Your people know where to find it. It's up to date. It's got the right phone numbers on it. They've got the right contacts. And Lance, I know you're going to be way better at this than me, so I'm going to kick it back. How do we prepare our clients? Because that's sort of the next step. Us at In-Telecom, and you may be in an industry where you have clients to serve as well. So preparing yourself is good for your clients, right? You need to operate. You need to make sure that you have continuity, even if it's at 80%. I don't think perfect is ever going to be something you achieve, especially during a hurricane. But if you're at 80%, you're good. How do we take care of our clients? How do we prepare them? That's something that I'm learning in this industry, is how do we take what we do and put it out there? So I'm interested on what your take is as far as, now that we're good, how do we serve the clients? How do we make sure they're good?
Yeah, absolutely, Trace. And I think you make a great and important point about, if we take care of our employees are our number one asset in our businesses. That's how we're in business, is the work that our employees are doing for us. So we're taking care of them. They're taking care of us as a business. So having that as part of your plan, I think is so important, because you have those aspects that you have to account for when we go to the next step of, okay, we're taken care of. Now, how do we take care of our customers? Being in the service industry, I mean, the United States economy is primarily a service economy, service-based. So we all have customers that we have to serve. And a lot of us are nationwide customers. Even though we're based out of the Gulf South, not all of our customers are based out of the Gulf South. So they still have a business to run. They depend on us for goods and services that we're offering to them. Their business, they may personally care about us, but their business, as far as running, it's really agnostic to us being in the middle of a hurricane. They still need our service, and we're still obligated to serve them. So we always have to ask questions when we're thinking about, all right, we're 96 hours out, we have a storm coming. So for all the everybody that's on here that has a service company, ask these couple questions, and I jotted these down. Is, who's going to work remotely? And what I mean by that is, we're going to designate some people that we're going to get out of the storm zone, that can set up office, that can go live the second we need to shut our doors, and for the rest of the company to go evacuate. Part of your contingency plan needs to say, who is that going to be? And Who that's going to be is going to depend on the different competency levels you need to continue supporting. Like Trey says, you may not be at 100%, but being at 75, 80% to be able to support your customer, if you're some type of remote help desk or remote advisor or consulting or something like that, you got to be able to provide some type of services for these customers. A second question you can ask yourself is, how are they going to work? Okay, we got them out of the storm zone. We got them out of the danger zone, or out of the possibility of being without service. We've got them somewhere where it's stable. How are they going to work? So when we say how they're going to work, where are they going to set up shop? Where are they going to plug in, take phone calls, do emails, all of that? From personal experience, let me add this advice. This is free to everybody. Don't use a hotel. And the reason being is we've done that before back years ago. We're like, all right, we're going to take a couple people. We're going to send them out of this zone. We're going to set them up a hotel. Well, guess what? You and about 500 other people are doing the same thing too. And you're all sharing one internet. So that's going to cause an issue in your ability to be able to service your customers. So do some pre-planning. If you've got a vendor or a customer or something that's outside of a zone that you can say, hey, Mr. Customer, Mr. Vendor, you mind if I send some people to share an office just to piggyback out of your facility for a couple of days while we're getting our facility back open? Something to that extent. We ourselves, we use vendors that we do business with, that we have disaster recovery offices, what we call them, DR offices, that we can send about a dozen of our team to set up shop, to be able to start taking phone calls, start taking tickets, start taking emails the second we close our office here. So you have to ask, how are they going to work? Another question is, what will their job entail? They're not sitting in their office. The environment's changed. Those definitions need to be clearly defined for those employees. They're not there on vacation. They're there evacuating. So we need to define for them clearly what their jobs are going to entail, what they need to be doing. If you're a field-based company, you're not going to be able to dispatch somebody out there. So how are they going to handle situations that are going to require field? They're down some field service. They're down the road. They don't have control over that. So you're going to need to define those for those people. And the last thing is, from an operations standpoint, you still have a business to run. So how are you going to maintain accountability of what these guys are going to need to accomplish as employees? Is there still processes in place that need to be followed? Is there still KPIs or some kind of performance indicators that they need to adhere by to ensure customer success, or to ensure they're successfully doing what they need to do? All these things need to be taken into consideration when we're looking at, all right, we're changing offices temporarily to recover from this storm. We need to set our people up for success, set our customers up for success, and ensure we keep the wheels turning. We keep our customer service. Now, keep in mind, if you're more regional based, if you're a regional based company, so most of your customers are in your region, you don't have any outside your region, this changes a little bit, only for the simple fact that when you're shut down, probably most of your customers are going to be shut down at the same time. But you can't take that for granted. You always need to have that contingency plan, because I know I'm familiar with it. Around here, a lot of people just, we recently went through Hurricane Ida a couple years ago, and during that storm, half of the neighborhood had power and internet, the other half didn't. So other people within the city or within your market territory, some people may be up and running while the other half are not. Storms are unpredictable that way, specifically hurricanes. So we have to have a contingency plan in place. We here at In-Telecom may be shut down, but somebody over 15 miles down the road, they may be up and running and ready to go and need our support. So we need to make sure we have somebody set up to be able to manage them and to be able to kind of take that on for the case of our customers. But Trace, how do we get our building, our facility, our company, you know, when we're thinking about it, and I know you work extensively on this, and that's why I want to kind of bring you in on your kind of mindset and your thought process behind. We've got people out. We've set up shop outside of the war zones. People are taking calls and all that stuff. Customers are being handled. Now, how do we start working to get our business going? You know, we have a facility we still need to maintain. How do we start working towards getting that going, getting that back up, and moving towards normalcy? I'm interested in see what you want to say about that.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And those are all great points. And I would challenge everyone that's working on your business continuity plan to include a lot of that in your business continuity plan, especially the employee tally of who can and can't go. You know, there are things that we don't consider until we start thinking about those things. Because, you know, you may have an employee that's a caregiver. They can't work in that situation, and they shouldn't. Right. Same thing with, you know, single parents, or they live in a very remote location. They don't have internet. All of a sudden, these become issues because they can't go to the office, and now they can't work remotely. So I would challenge you to take Lance's notes, take Lance's questions, and work those into your business continuity plan, because that's going to help set expectations, and it will limit the panic for your staff. Even if it's adjusting, like Lance said, KPIs, SLAs. We have internal SLAs where we challenge ourselves to hit certain marks. And I wouldn't want ITC employees to feel burdened by those SLAs when we're not operating at 100%. So maybe state those things in your BC plan. And I think, to Lance's question, how do you get back to normal becomes easier because you weren't abnormal for very long, right? Even during the response, and this was all prepped and planned. So you're closer to normal than you would be if you were just doing this on the fly. One of the ways I saw this really affect an organization, it was a very large call center. And what we did was we started meeting before the storm. We would have these, okay, what does it look like? How do we want to operate? Where do we want to split up? We have different disaster recovery locations. We used to call them DR. They're not DR, BC locations now. Which way is the storm going to curve? We'll send them the other way. We wait to the last minute. We send people out there. The organization didn't have a roster of people that were willing to go, that could go remote, that were able to. And that was a scramble. They were probably at 70% of what they could have been at because that was last minute. So that kind of prep, it was harder for them to get back to normal, to get back to Lance's original question, because of the scramble. Right? So the better prepared you are, the more thorough your business continuity plan is, the easier that return to normal is. So essentially, day one is your tip of the spear. I would say day zero, as far as normal operations are. So in our instance, we can't do project work if there's a storm coming. We're certainly not going to send guys up telephone poles and running cables and climbing on roofs. So they become our de facto call center because their work is shut down. And we know that. We have those employees, we know, we send them ahead. So that way the transition is much, much easier. So they're sitting there, they're taking calls, they're triaging. Obviously, we're not at 100% with just a skeleton crew as our normal crew travels, as they disperse. So from a client side, a customer perspective, they haven't experienced anything out of the ordinary. They've been able to drop tickets, drop help requests, and we've maintained that sense of normalcy that Lance is talking about. Once everybody gets settled into their locations, they're going to work remote, they're going to work from a satellite office. Day one is really getting their bearings. And I think that there's a lot of grace, no matter how well prepared you are, that needs to go into day one. Your people are checking in on their families. Your people are worried about spouses who may not have traveled with them. They're worried about extended family, or did they lose their home, right? Or are they going to lose all the food in their fridge? You know, there's a lot of things going through people's minds outside of the technology. And I think the technology is the easiest to prep. So when we're talking about day zero and normalcy, we know who's going, as Lance established. Have a rolling bag that you stash in the closet, depending on how big your organization is. You can, there's all kinds of tools out there depending on what you want to do. But, you know, I challenge everyone to sort of look at your networking, look at what you need to stay up, and build you a smaller mobile version of that. Then you can take it to an event center. Then you can take it to a client location, a DR location, plug your people in. They're working fairly normal. You're up and running. Then you can sort of pivot to what Lance talked about, which is, okay, let's focus on our internal operations. We've got people in place. We've got the technology in place. Even if it's something as simple as we've got 2 hotspots and 4 administrative assistants, because that's what we need to keep our business running. That's totally fine. Or it's, access points, wireless racks and things that are packaged up and you can take with you. But once everybody's working, day one, you kind of survive day one, everybody gets sort of caught up from the travel. Then you have to look inward again and say, okay, is this going to be a long-term stay? Or is this going to be a very short-term sort of situation? Hurricanes specifically become long-term issues for business continuity. You have to have someone assess your location. You have to have someone assess. You have to keep, which normally we are, keeping an eye on where are the power outages? What are the estimates to get things back on? Is our generator running and flooded? Do we have the personnel close enough? That's something else you got to consider. Did we evacuate everyone? Well, no one's close to the office now. We can't go back and check. So I've been in situations where I was the person that stayed in the area. I had chosen not to evacuate. I was going to stay, and I was on site to assess the damage fairly quickly. Within 24 hours, we can go assess. And so that's the way you have to kind of think about it when you're preparing this business continuity plan and that return to normalcy that Lance is talking about. If you decide that you're going to disperse and that you would rather have your people comfortable, and which I think is the right move, you also need a return to action. And how do you assess your building? And how do you make sure that your vendors are back up and running? You don't want to have everyone come back if your building's not up and running. You don't want to have everyone come back if your key vendors aren't up and running. And that's why you would list those in that business continuity plan.
No, absolutely. And I think that's a great point that you're making there, Trace, and which is so important. You want to get back to normalcy. The biggest way you get back to normal is having the right plan to begin with. And that definitely that starts with your plan is in place come January 1, because on June 1st, when hurricane season starts, everything is in place. You know where it's at. It's been vetted. Your disaster response teams are in place. Your accountabilities are in place. People who are going to travel. Those who are responsible for closing up shop here or closing the kitchen per se, they're in place. They're accountable. And they know what needs to be done. What I'd like to do a little bit here is let's talk a little bit about that preparation. What is that preparation? What does that preparation look like? I know from my end on the technical side, we got to talk about data, and that's going to be so important in all of this. Specifically if you're getting people to run to another state or to be out of the war zone of the storm, you've got people running out there. How are they going to access the data? How is your system set up? If you have a shared database, or you have shared folders, or you have some kind of critical data that you need to be able to access in order to support and track your customers, how does that look? And there's lots of options out there. What are your ideas on that, Trace?
Yeah, and actually, I see this question from Timothy here in the chat, and it goes right along. It's perfect timing, Timothy. Thanks for that. So if you're still operating with on-prem equipment and critical equipment, I'll give you an example of an organization that was really unprepared when it came to exactly that thing. So anyone who's ever worked in retail or anything like that, they know what a point of sale system is. And before cloud tendencies, before all of these things, most point of sale systems were on site. And in healthcare, these point of sale system had patient data. I mean, these things had to be very, very secure. You had to come in on a very specific VPN with multi-factor access, and you had to be coming in from a whitelisted IP address, and all of these things that have to be in place, especially if you're going to access that data offsite. And that was never considered in their business continuity plan. One, because this is a retail environment. They can't do any business if they're not on site. So in their mind, after doing an after action review with their team, the thought process was, well, if we can't get to the office, we can't work anyway. So we'll just close everything down, hunker down, and all of that. Well, in a long-term hurricane situation, they realized that there was a lot of work that they could be doing. And I think COVID really exposed a lot of that, right? Where all of a sudden you're finding work for people to do, because there is work, there is admin work, there is all kinds of stuff. And you have people working remotely that have never accessed this database offline or offsite. So that's where that preparation comes in, that a lot of people don't consider. Is we need their IP address from wherever they're going to be working remotely. Where live fire drills are so important there for that preparation. All of a sudden, they've got people spread out that are at home, that have computers, that have internet, that have the time, that could work. They can't get to anything. That that is on site. On site's up, the generator's up, but their IP addresses aren't recognized. They've never used a VPN before, so even user training becomes an issue there. Your technicians who are used to being on site, who are used to working from a terminal on site, they don't know what a VPN is. And those were all surprises that this organization had to deal with. All of a sudden, they're in place. It's been a few days. They're ready to get back to work, and they're at a complete standstill because they can't get people into their data. So that's a very good point that Lance made, is the data has to be accessible. Whether it's cloud, whether it's on-prem, you need to know how that stuff is accessed, how people get to it, and what they would need to get to. Even if you don't have compliance, frameworks that you have to abide by, most general IT security practice at this point is to have some sort of MFA, VPN on this data. So those are definitely things to consider. And I think the preparation there is to do a tabletop exercise about once a year, to do a live fire exercise once a year. And, Lance has seen it. I've seen it. You send a couple folks home, you see if it works, I've definitely seen organizations be caught unaware and trying to do it on the fly. Like Lance said, trying to do it in that 96-hour window. And it's never good. You can survive. I'm not going to say you can't pull it off. I've pulled it off. I've gotten phone calls from organizations that were unprepared and you go into overdrive. But I can tell you, I've been a part of it where it's worked well. And that is just a much better experience for customers, for clients, for us. And preparation is key there. And Lance brings up a very good point about data, knowing what you have, knowing what you need. And that's part of your preparation as well. Do you need to consider moving it to the cloud? Do you still have email that's hosted on site? What happens if a flood comes from that hurricane? Your email server's, done, and those kinds of things. So I'm looking to make sure we don't have anything in chat related, but I think knowing what your people are going to do, preparation, evacuation, right? Employee safety, those are all things to consider. You don't want a bad taste in their mouth from having to experience. It's a stressful and traumatic time already. And the last thing you want to do is alienate your employees because you had a bad plan or you had no plan. And Lance, on the technical side, right? So we've gotten our people, we've gotten our places. I'm curious on some common questions we've received, just because I don't get to take those phone calls as much in my side. What are the questions we're getting from other industries, from other businesses, from clients? What are their concerns? We're planned, we're good, we've got our people out. Are there any other things that they're concerned about?
Well, and the reason that I brought up the data, that's always the number one concern. So just to kind of touch on that lightly and expand a little bit on what you were talking about, Trace, is where is your data hosted? It goes into the mindset here for how we're going to control and how we're going to manage our data. Goes on the same lines with, should we have a backup solution? What is our disaster? When we're talking about a business continuity plan, we're talking about it here in the context of a hurricane or a natural disaster, but expands beyond that. We're also talking about backup solutions. We're talking about, how do we get your business up and running, or how do we get your business to not go down? So to expand a little bit on that is if you have to ask yourself a question. If you have an on-premise server, you have a server sitting there in a closet that everybody accesses, or you have a hosted email server inside your house or inside your business, you have it there, and some type of disaster happens, a crash, a hurricane, a fire, something happens. How long can you be out of business? How long can you go without working? And that's a question you have to ask yourself when we're talking about building your business continuity plan. If the answer is anything less than a day, you really need to explore a cloud hosted solution. And there's various ones out there that can help you get this accomplished. Through Azure, through AWS, you can host applications, you can host servers, you can host files, you can host different things that keep your business up in databases, programs, through different hosting services like a Rackspace or something like that. Co-location, things like that. You can host whole entities of your network in a replicated cloud solution. That helps to ensure that those items stay up. Microsoft has Office 365 now with Azure services that can host your email that won't be interrupted during. It's not geographically specific, so it's not going to really break down during those processes. And those things won't be missed. Let's talk about communication. We talked about email, which is a very large part of our communication today. What can we do for email? How can we make sure email stays up and running? How do we get accessible? There's tons of solutions out there that can do that, including Office 365, including G Suite, stuff like that hosts it, backs it up, and safeguards it for you. But let's talk about communications as far as telephones. That's still a problem. If you have an on-premise phone system that's reliant on your local carrier to provide you dial tone, the second that storm hits and power gets cut, your phones are down. And even if you have power to your building, even if you have generator power to your building, the line feeds going into your facility, they're cut, they're down. So you're not going to be able to get phone calls. Somebody tries to call your business during that time, they're going to get busy signal or an endless ring, depending on the type of service that you have. Unless you're contacting the carrier and getting the phone forwarded off, but that means all of your phone numbers are now going to somebody's cell phone, and that's to hope that if which any of us here have gone through Katrina, no, phones will stop working. Cell phones. We had a Super Bowl here just not too long ago. We lost cell phone during it, much less during Katrina. We lost cell phone for days. Text was the only thing that was working at that time. So the only way you can really get around that is some type of unified communication solution that is a hosted solution. And I bring this up, not that this is a plug for our company, but we offer ITC Cloud solution, which is a cloud-based telephone solution that allow you to do texting, that allow you to do instant messaging, allow you to take phone calls. Your phones will always get answered. It can tie to your cell phone that allows you to receive and send, make calls, all keeping your business running, whether your building's shut down or not. So we have to keep those things in mind when it comes to communications, when it comes to accessing data, when it comes to making sure that we have a plan for that stuff, because part of our business continuity plan that we have is, in order for all the employees to stay together and to know and to be able to check in on one another. It's part of our culture. It's part of a family culture that we have here in In-Telecom. We want to make sure everybody's doing all right. So we've set up through our hosted telephone platform conference bridges with designated times for different teams to be able to just call in, check on one another, let leadership know how they're doing, how their families are doing, so we can make sure our most valuable assets, our employees, are good. They're taken care of. Is there anything us as an organization can do to help them through, as Trace mentioned, probably one of the most difficult times that they're going to go through, because there's so much uncertainty within hurricanes.
I think that's a good point with the unified communications as well. If your people are plugged in all the time, and I'm certainly not advocating that 24/7 plugged in culture. That's not at all what I'm saying. But most of the time during a hurricane, event, people want to stay connected. They want some sense of normalcy, and that cloud phone system. And I see a couple questions here in chat, and I want to address it a little bit while we still have some time. Basically, what Lance is saying, and I agree, and I don't want to put meaning into his mouth by any means, but
No.
a general mix of communication methods is the best method. Anytime you have those overlapping redundancies. So Teams, we use Teams every day. Teams can be done on the phone. It can be done on an app. It can be done on a computer. You can dial in from your phone. If you don't have good internet, you can hop in on the web. So Teams becomes very, very vital to us in this type of situation and staying plugged in. But if you have rural employees and they don't have internet, they don't have text, that's where that business continuity plan, where they don't. What is their backup plan? Do you have their backup contact number for someone else's home that they may be staying at? And that unified communications, when it comes to looking out for your employees, is key, because it's also good for you as a business owner. And so, and that's a good question. So if it, like with the phones being out, the cell phones, that's why you have that mix. Well, okay, well, I know I can get on Teams. I can get on Teams on my computer because I still have internet. Or, I evacuated to somewhere else and they still have internet. And if you're using a cloud phone provider, so like what ITC does, it's one call. You can send them a message, email, whatever form you have available at the time. You call, send an email message, whatever. Microsoft Teams is a chat platform. So Dana, I see that question. I'm going to get right back to it. So basically, you kind of dodge the cell phone outages by utilizing a unified communications platform, because something like ITC Cloud or Microsoft Teams is web-based. It's all web-driven. So as long as someone can get internet access, now, obviously, if they're out in the woods and their only internet is via cellular, sometimes that's why we say shoot for 80%, don't shoot for 100%, right? Some of your people may not be available. But Microsoft Teams, the reason I find it to be a very key thing to what Lance is talking about when it comes to culture and communication and keeping your people safe is Microsoft Teams is something that you get with most Microsoft licenses. And it's mainly for chat, for just sort of chatting back and forth with your teammates and colleagues. You can have group chats. So one of the powerful ways you can use Teams in a real world hurricane scenario is you stand up a Teams group, a chat group for your disaster recovery team. Say, hey, we've got a hurricane coming. This is the chat for it. Everybody's in here all the time. Everything's in one place. Whether they're on their cell phone driving, they've got Teams, right? Hopefully not while they're driving, but they've got Teams on their phone, on their cell phone application. They can get to Teams from their computer. They can get to Teams from a personal computer. Maybe it was a last minute sort of disaster scenario where they lost their home to a tornado, right? That's happened during these hurricanes. All of a sudden, their work machine is non-existent. They can still communicate with you via one of these unified platforms. Even ITC Cloud has messaging capabilities and things like that. So I would strongly consider, while you're thinking about your disaster recovery, your hurricane recovery, how am I going to unify my communication stack? How am I going to make sure that my people are always able to contact me? I'm able to contact them. I want to check up on my folks during a hurricane. I know Lance is the same way. How are you doing? How are you holding up? What's your schedule look like? You may not be able to be 8 to 5 because maybe you're staying with someone else and maybe you have to work a later shift. Those are the small things. We talk about that return to normalcy. I think we should shoot to remain normal most of the time as far as how people are operating, and that will help drive that normalcy. Is they're used to using Teams in their everyday life. Nothing really changes, and it allows us to really stay connected without feeling overburdened by that connection. Like I'm having to constantly text someone or bother them or blow them up via email. I pop it into Teams chat. I know everybody's got it. So yeah, sorry to interrupt, Lance. I caught that, and I thought what a great way to talk about unified communications, and everything is tech now. Your phones, your chat, your email, it can all be a one-stop shop. It doesn't have to be a frustrating experience. And during a hurricane, the last thing you want to do is figure out how to communicate. Communication is key, and figuring out how to communicate. And Lance, if you want to take that question about how we utilize Teams more on your side, I know over here on the admin side, most of our Teams is just general back and forth chat. We use it to make video calls. but there are some really great things you can do with groups and keeping your technicians together and making sure those things are happening, even giving people a place to vent that leadership can't see. I find that to be a very powerful tool. Now, obviously, you can see it if you need to, but giving the technicians a place where they can chat, that's their chat. They can share gifts and talk. So, Lance, how are you guys utilizing Teams day to day? Not necessarily just in a disaster environment, but sort of this normal, if you adopt it day to day and they're just used to using a platform like this, it carries into this disaster sort of situation. So I'm curious, just day to day, how are y'all utilizing your unified communications over there?
No, absolutely. And I think that's the key phrase of what Team stands for. That's a unified communications platform. And what we use it for is just pure collaboration. So the whole structure behind what Teams was, to give you a little history of it. So Microsoft, they owned Skype for the longest time. Skype was their video conferencing solution years back that they utilized for, you had to have a Skype server there on your site, and then you had Skype agents installed on people's workstations, and you're able to make video calls to one another within your organization. Microsoft kind of took that Skype platform and expanded upon it, and that's where they created the Teams environment. And what Teams is full collaboration. Yes, it's a chat client you can use to quickly chat amongst people. Excuse me. For little short messages or long messages, depending on the communications that needs to happen. You can video conference with another Teams user. Doesn't even have to be someone within the organization. You can video conference with anybody and set up video meetings through Teams to be able to collaborate with anybody in the world. Really, you can make voice calls to one another through the Teams platform. Gives you the ability to utilize it like a desktop phone system. More importantly, then, you can share files. You can create teams, not just groups, to where, like Trace was talking about, you can create chat groups that has Dana, you brought this question. I can create a group with me, Trace, and Dana where we can chat with one another. But I can also create a team. And within that team, I can invite several different people into that, and we can collaborate on documents, share documents. We can whiteboard. We can put together and collaborate on several different items that allows us to help accomplish work. One of the ways we started really utilizing it to improve upon was our project management process. We have several different people involved in our project management process. We have not only the project manager and the project tech and the project supervisor, we have customers involved in this process too. We're collecting information from. So instead of constantly calling them and having them email information, sending them a document, have them fill out the document, send it back to us, put it in the file, we create a Microsoft team, and we invite that individual customer, that individual vendor, to be a member of that team. And then as they get those documents, they just upload them into that team, and everybody that's in that team can share that document, collaborate on that document, and kind of really use it to the max. So there's a lot within Teams that you can use just to build a collaboration. And as Trace stated, help in today's technological world, you're still building culture. You're still building that cohesiveness of your team together, so that you still have that closeness. You still have that everybody's at short arm's length from you at any point, no matter you're in the same room, same building, or same state. And that's one of the beauty parts about Teams, and that falls right into, as Trace says, looking at Teams from that standpoint. Now let's fast forward into a disaster recovery situation like a hurricane or a fire or a tornado or some kind of natural disaster. That type of technology fits right into what you're trying to build as a culture, as a business owner, as a business leader, for your team, to make sure everybody's staying in touch, everybody's staying collaborating, everybody's staying in communication. And it helps you to help cultivate that and keep that moving, which goes back to, let's start planning this prior to hurricane season. We're living and breathing in this thing. Come hurricane season, we're barely missing the fact that our teammate is not even right next to us.
Mm-hmm. That's a good point.
Absolutely.
It's a fantastic tool. I had to join in on this one just a little bit, guys. Teams is
Absolutely.
how we do everything here. It really lends to, I think, kind of the last thing I want to make sure that we touch on is how we're handling just employee situations in our various teams. That we've got a team in teams to deploy out and handle things that are going on, but what about the rest of our people? And
Right.
how do we address what they're going to do? How do we get them back to work smoothly and accommodate for all their varying situations? And I think something like that certainly belongs in business continuity plan. Nothing is ever going to go the way that you want it to right off the bat.
Sure.
Either
Right.
of y'all kind of touch on one of those points for me?
Yeah. So we used it in the past exactly like that, and I can tell you the ability to build a war room and to have a place where you can act and change course when needed. So Taylor, like you're asking, how do you've got a business continuity plan and everything's good, and if you've read The Art of War, no battle strategy ever survives contact with the enemy. It just doesn't. You can have everything planned out all you want. Your business continuity is solid. Your people are dispersed. You're doing your thing. There's going to be something that you need to change. There's going to be something you need to communicate out. And Teams is how you can do that, and how you can make sure Teams is very accountable and trackable. You know who saw the message, when they saw it, if they got it. There's a checkbox beside it. There's an eyeball beside it. So your employees can't say, oh, I didn't get that. I didn't see that. You have a war room in Teams. Everybody that's critical is in that war room. You post status updates there. It really takes the guesswork out of that whole situation. How do you take care of your people? How do you make sure you're communicating with them? You get a unified communications platform that has logging and tracking, and you just work like normal. Like Lance said, if that's how you're operating every day, then when you go into a disaster recovery situation, it's no different. You're still collaborating with your clients. You're still able to communicate. When those changes happen, when you're ready for people to come back to work, you can schedule it right much easier when everybody's sort of in the same group, in the same teams. Hey, so-and-so said they can come back Monday. That's perfect. I'll continue working from home Monday. I'll roll in Tuesday. Because if you have everybody coming back on the same day, who's answering your phones, right? So staggering that return to work becomes much easier with a unified communications platform, because it gives everyone a voice and everyone can see the responses, as opposed to getting filtered through supervisors and various people. And sometimes you need that. But in a disaster recovery, I do think transparency is king, and Teams allows you to be transparent. Everybody can see it. Everybody's getting the same information. It's not that telephone game where I told the manager who told somebody and the information was wrong. It's always the right information, the same information getting to your people.
Absolutely. I think one of the things that goes back to your question, Taylor, is how do we start planning? How do we account for those employees that are going through that? And it goes back to where we were when we started this discussion. Is it's all part of your plan. The better your plan, the more vetted, the more thought out, the more you put into the plan, the easier it is to account for everybody, the easier it is to make sure your employees are taken care of, your customers are taken care of, your business structure is taken care of, and that your communications are taken care of. And because going in without a plan, you're destined to fail. Things are destined to be dropped. As Trace just said too, things are going to drop anyways. You're in the midst of a disaster at this point. Things are going everywhere. But the most and the best sought out plan will help you not forget as much. It'll help the wheels keep rolling much smoother.
Yeah,
and I'm assuming that's going to evolve too over time, right? These plans aren't static; they've got to constantly evolve. I mean, we do ours, I'm sure, several times a year, right?
Yeah, yearly.
Yeah. Well, fantastic, guys. I appreciate you guys being here. I'm gonna, Q&A mode has been active this entire time, but I just want to make sure if there's anybody that has any kind of questions, we've got a few minutes left to get them answered now. In the meantime, I know one of the things we kind of touched on a little bit with these business continuity plans is having a documented setup requirement for establishing check-ins, establishing communication procedures before, during, after, and making sure our people understand this is how you got to expect this to go.
I think the after is important. I think the return to work plan, the after action review, something you got to consider, like Taylor said, these are ever evolving. And something that needs to be part of your BC plan is when we come back, what are we reviewing? What are we looking at so that next time it's better? And who are my people that I'm going to review with? Maybe I had some employees that did not do what was expected. What's the strategy there for return to work, after action review? We go into sort of that mode of, all right, now we review our BC plan and we update it for next time. It's going to be ever evolving. So that's a good point. Make sure those afters, quote, afters are part of that BC plan and what your return to work looks like and what your BC review looks like. That way, you know what you did well and what you didn't. And I hate to say you get better with practice because no one wants to practice.
Yeah, right.
Practice hurricanes? No, we all get to though. I mean,
you will learn, and tabletops are a great way to do that. Talk through what you would do when you're building your BC plan. So yeah, Taylor, that's a good point. The afters are very important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We never know what to expect with these kind of things. I mean, that's just the nature of storm season in general. It's September and we haven't seen anything yet. So we don't know when it's going to hit, if it's going to this year, but we still gotta be able to plan for it.
Yeah, and the peak of hurricane season was September 10th. So we're on the backside of it, but that doesn't mean anything because Hurricane Rita hit the end of September and made a lot of damage in the Lake Charles area. Yeah. So we can't go
fire. Exactly. And most of these are good, situational awareness, fire, flooding, COVID, right? When we had the pandemic, a lot of the core frameworks, like Lance said, we dodged this one, but man, I got hit with an ice storm where I'm at, which is very, very rare, not something we were prepared for. But we operated the same way we would have in a hurricane. So it's still worth having that conversation, Lance. It's a very good point. I mean, we may dodge it this time, but something's going to hit.
Well, absolutely. And just to take into consideration, we had a customer in California that one day got hit with an earthquake that took their business out for a day, came back online. Within a week, their internet and power got taken out by fire because they were having wildfires at the time. So, I mean, and when we consider all this, we're talking about natural disasters, but that's not always the case. And Trace can probably definitely sympathize with this. There's a cybersecurity aspect that you need to have disaster recovery for. I mean, people get hit by ransomware. What are you going to do with that? What are you going to do when your business gets shut down? When there's a breach, if there's a regulation fault that a regulatory body shuts you down, what's your contingency plans with this? So this all falls kind of into that same realm.
That's part two. We'll do cyber.
That's part two.
That's kind of the perfect segue for me here. So again, I thank everybody for being in here. We will be doing more of these types of events, kind of getting away from the traditional slideshow presentation and kind of trying to encourage some interaction and some good question and answers. I definitely think on the business continuity side, we can certainly come up with at least another hour on developing these plans for these what ifs. But to give you an idea, we do have another one of these chats coming up here on September the 27th at 10 o'clock CST. For those of y'all not in South Louisiana with us, it's on business data security and reducing security risks, protecting your bottom line and keeping your business running. We'll be partnering with Duo Security / Cisco, and Sean Torres and Ron Scoochard will be joining us for that one. So if you have any interest in that, want to learn how to better secure your business and protect your data, scan the QR code that's on the screen there. You'll be able to join in, and we'd be happy to see you in there. For everybody that joined today, as always, the recordings will be sent out as soon as possible. We also have a hurricane preparedness checklist that you may have received from us if you're on our client list. If not, I'll be sending that out as well. Kind of give you some guidelines on preparing your network infrastructure, your employees, even your physical facilities to kind of weather the storm a little bit. But guys, as always, I appreciate you joining us for this. Absolutely fantastic information. I certainly feel like I learned something. So thank you guys again.
Thanks, Taylor.
No, thank you for having us.
Absolutely.
All right, everybody. Thank you. Have a great day.
Bye, everybody.